We're going to start today's event by introducing Mr. Robert E. James II. He is chairman of the National Bankers Association and founder and CEO of Carver Financial Corporation. We're happy to have him with us, so Mr. Robert James, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Melvin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Robert James II, and I'm really honored to join Veterans in Transition today as you honor the memory of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Thank you to Rod Miner for inviting me, and thank you to all of the veterans here today for the sacrifices you have made. I'm privileged to represent Carver State Bank of Savannah, Georgia, in service of as chairman of the National Bankers Association. Both Carver and the NBA were founded in 1927 and are celebrating their 95th anniversaries this year. As one of the nation's 19 remaining Black-owned banks, Carver has proudly embraced our mission to provide the building blocks to financial freedom. The NBA has a distinguished legacy itself as the voice of America's minority-owned banks, representing Black, Asian American, Hispanic American, and Native American banks in our shared goal to eliminate the racial wealth gap in America. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is commonly remembered for his efforts to secure basic civil rights for Black Americans. And we often think of those rights in the context of access to public accommodations and voting. While the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were monumental achievements in American history, and we owe a debt to Dr. King for leading the effort to strike down legal segregation and guarantee Black people the equal right to vote, Dr. King also clearly recognized that the right to eat in whatever restaurant you want, or even the right to vote, are only a part of the puzzle when it comes to being a full citizen in this country. Dr. King also fought for economic rights, such as access to good jobs and the ability to generate wealth through home ownership and entrepreneurship, because he knew that full economic participation is a critical aspect of full citizenship in America. Unfortunately, we are very far from full equality for Black and brown people in America, perhaps even further from this goal than when Dr. King was cut down on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel in 1968. According to the Federal Reserve and other economists, in 1968, the median Black household had net worth of about 9.7% of that of the median white household. By 2016, we had actually lost ground, with the median Black household being worth only about 8.7% as much as the median white household. A 2020 report commissioned by Citicorp indicated that if we close this racial wealth gap today, we could add $5 trillion to the US gross domestic product. Closing this gap would be good for everyone. Since the murder of George Floyd, Americans have paid more attention to our racial inequality than at any time since Dr. King's assassination. Corporate America has pledged billions of dollars to invest in minority businesses and communities, and large banks and even the federal government have made unprecedented amounts of capital available to some minority banks. While it is important for the government and corporate America to support minority banks and other businesses, it's equally important that we support one another. Dr. King's last speech was delivered in support of striking sanitation workers in Memphis, hardworking men seeking a decent wage, safe conditions, dignity, and a future for themselves and their families. In other words, they were looking for full economic citizenship. In that speech, he not only called for the community to march in support of the workers, but he also called for them to pool their resources and use economic power to affect the change that they wanted to see. He called for them to follow the lead of his organization and take their money out of the bigger local banks and deposit it with Memphis's Black-owned bank. This call to action is still relevant today. When possible, we should deposit our money in minority-owned banks, and our banks should turn around and make that capital available to minority-owned businesses, which will allow us to build our collective economic power as Dr. King instructed. If we address the racial wealth gap, Black and brown communities will be stronger and the economy will work better for all Americans. In that final speech, Dr. King recounted some of his greatest successes in the struggle for racial justice. From Birmingham to Montgomery to Selma, he also made this connection between the struggle for integration, voting rights, and economic rights. Dr. King said that God had allowed him to go up to the mountain and look over, and that he had seen the promised land. He said that he might not get there with us, but that his eyes had seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Let's work together and fulfill Dr. King's vision. Let's get to the promised land and eliminate the racial wealth gap in America. Thank you so much.